Now to discuss, we are joined by our next guest, María Alejandra Aristeguieta, former Venezuelan ambassador to the UN and Switzerland. Thank you very much for joining us, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
So, like we said on Wednesday, 4 Russian naval vessels, including a nuclear-powered submarine and a frigate, have docked in Cuba. We know that they already left today. But what should we make of this visit? What is your take on it? Was it a show of strength, or was it just a friendly visit that we shouldn't really look deep into it?
Well, they are definitely framing it as a friendly visit and inviting people on board to have a look and an exchange of, let's say, technical cooperation on the side of Russia with Cuba. But the fact is that this comes at a moment just after the US has been allowing the Ukraine to use its weapons to fire in Russian territory, and this has gotten Putin very, very upset. But also very close to the peace conference that just took place here in Switzerland in Birkenstock. And the fact that Russia was not invited and that many Western countries signed an agreement proposing a peace roadmap, I'm sure that this is just to elaborate on how is this diplomacy and multilateral respect for international laws can be compared to brutal force. So it's a bit of a show-off and to show their strength and to show the strength with regards to the United States, of course, and to Western countries. But it's also a way to say, don't meddle around in my neighborhood. And regionally, I think there are 2 facts that we also need to take into account. One of them is that Cuba is in desperate need of funds. It's been having talks with Russia and will do anything to get funds from Russia because they are on the verge of an emergency health and sanitary and electricity and food emergency. So they are very much like Venezuela was a couple of years back in this humanitarian emergency, and they've been looking for funds without any success. So I'm sure that by allowing the Russian vessels and Russian fleet to be in their area, they are also cozying up with Russia even more closely to be able to get some funds in exchange. And then on the other side, there's Venezuela, which is will be having elections very shortly on the 28th of July. If polls would show correctly, 80% of the population's vote intention would vote against Maduro, and Maduro is a well-known ally of Russia and Putin. So by doing this, we suspect that they have something to say on the negotiations that are being carried out by the Americans and the Venezuelan regime to allow for some transparent and free and fair elections. And this is something that's really at stake in Venezuela right now. And the negotiations are taking place in Qatar. And Russia, of course, is not part of those negotiations and cannot do anything about those negotiations except show some strength again and to slightly threaten the Venezuelan regime not to give in into the American pressure. So we could see all these issues regionally and globally that are coming, in place at the same time. And this, of course, I think Russia needs to show some strength and needs to show that they still are a very big player, and they should have been. They're very upset by the fact that they were not invited to Switzerland. They're upset about the moves that have been taking place with regards to the United States foreign policy, and of course these moves that they might lose control over in Latin America if elections are not rigged and the opposition wins on the 28th of July.
Right, Mrs. Ambassador, I just wanted to concentrate on Venezuela a little bit more. So recently, Venezuela's Minister of Defense said that the United States, as a hegemonic power, has lost hegemonic status. So, I mean, how shall we understand this relationship between the US and Venezuela versus Venezuelan relationship with Russia?
Well, Russia is a very close ally to Venezuela. It has been providing arms. It has been providing troops at some point, and of course, it did provide a lot of funds. And Venezuela is also geopolitically as interesting as Cuba may be, because we're just like 2-3 hours away. So there are 4 countries in Latin America that are very close to the United States: Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and further south, there's Bolivia. These countries are very close allies to Russia, and geopolitically for Russia, it's a very interesting deal to have the United States backyard getting a bit of a unrestful and a bit of conflict. A couple of months back, we were seeing Venezuela trying to engage in an escalation with Guyana. I think that was, for the time being, this is on a halt. But this is part of this global geopolitical landscape. And on the other hand, the fact that the Venezuelan regime, or the dictator Maduro and his elite, his top officials, are negotiating at this very moment with the Americans for the Russian, is something that they really are not looking forward to, because they might lose a very important country, not only just because it's an oil-producing country, but also because they also have a base in Venezuela that it's very close to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Now, in general, how heavily is the Latin America and the Caribbean influenced by Russia, would you say?
Unfortunately, at this moment, Russia, not just both, China, Russia, and Iran have penetrated Latin America in the last 20 years. They are very close to many of these countries. Particularly, if we look at the BRICS group, we can see that Brazil is very close to Russia, and now there are other countries joining into the BRICS. But Brazil is like probably its most important ally, not just to Russia but also to China, being a democratic country. The other countries are mostly dependent on Russia for many issues, arms, weapons, and technical cooperation, military cooperation. And they also have, of course, they have been engaging for a long time in exchanges, in oil-producing exchanges. Rosneft was in Venezuela for a long time. And it's a close trade relationship with Venezuela. So all of these countries have been growing relationships with Iran, China, and Russia. And of course, this is seen as the global South developing a new relationship in opposition to the West and in opposition to the United States.
And also we know that Cuba and Russia are heavily sanctioned by the United States, so it's also a common denominator for these 2 countries.
Right, and I also
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask you about perhaps an emerging rift within Latin America, because we have some countries we've just discussed, right, that are sort of, one could say, more pro-Russian. You've mentioned Brazil, we have Venezuela there, but we also have countries such as Argentina, for instance. I see Uruguay here on the list of signatories of this new communique during the Ukraine Peace Summit. So can we see that polarization perhaps emerging on the continent?
Oh yes, this has been very much the landscape in the last 20 years or so. Right now, Argentina, after Milei was elected, have shifted totally, let's say, to the West. It's making closer ties with Europe, with the United States, and other countries. So they are moving away from their past alignment with Russia. A couple of years back, I think it was in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Argentina's foreign minister said that it was basically open to, first of all, they would keep themselves, maintain neutrality, and they would propose themselves as a good officers between Ukraine and Russia, and it never actually condemned Russia. So having Milei in Argentina at this moment as a president means that there's a shift away from that position that Fernandez used to have, and it's joining other countries like Uruguay and Paraguay in this position closer to Western interests and to, of course, liberal democracy. I think that the big exception here is Boric in Chile, being a leftist coming from the Communist Party, having been historically someone from the very far left, once he has been elected, he has taken this position, this very centralist position, to abide by international rules, and it's far more interested in having a Western, let's say, a position that resembles more to the West and to liberal democracies than any position that you would associate with China or with Russia or, of course, with Iran and this group of countries.
Well, it's interesting how the war in Ukraine, I think we can say that it's changed totally the political theater all over the world, and we see more and more changes coming. María Alejandra Aristeguieta, former Venezuelan ambassador to the UN and Switzerland, was our guest. Thank you, ma'am, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.